Hi everyone. So today I'm going to continue my Explained Correctly series, and I'm going to begin talking about the types themselves. The types explained correctly. And today I'm going to be talking about the ENTP to start this off. So the ENTP, known as the inventor. Yes, this is my type. It's a type I'm very fond of course. And as you'll see with all the different types, they are divided up into four main parts, you could say, and I'll be covering each part. This part's called a block. So I'll be covering each block, making up each of the 16 types, and starting today, of course, with the ENTP. So what's the first block? The first block is the ego block. And for the ENTP, the ego block is made up of NE, so extroverted intuition, and TI, introverted thinking. And when this is together, you may have seen this in my video about NE and TI together, what this suggests is a type that what they bring to the world, what they are most likely to focus on as an area of strength and an area of value, so this is sort of their calling card, you could say, is exploration of theory. This is a type which is very interested in looking at all different sorts of ways of making sense of the world around them. So they are theory builders, they are system explorers. They want to find the perfect theory to explain how everything fits together. That's the main point for when you have NE and TI together. And the idea is that they want to sort of build an understanding of the world where everything sort of fits together and makes sense and covers all different aspects and all different possibilities. So it's a very theoretical space. Now, out of this, you have the first function, which is the dominant function. This is in the ego block, and that for an ENTP is extroverted intuition. So the ENTP, their main lens, their main way of looking at the world is through this extrovert intuition, through expanding the range of possibility around them. ENTPs, by their nature, are very curious, very open-minded individuals. They are types which are interested in all the different possibilities around them, and they're drawn to understand what these different possibilities are. They want to make sense of them. They want to allow new potential things to happen. So what they're inclined to do is they're quite a permissive type. They're a type which tends to be very open-ended, likes to explore things, doesn't like to limit possibilities. This is a type which may try things which other people may not find always entirely appropriate to try, but they want to see it. They want to see what could possibly happen. And that's the key thing. That's what's motivating them throughout. So expanding that range of possibilities is very, very much a focus. Now, what is supporting them with extroverted intuition, supporting this general curiosity and open-mindedness, is introverted thinking. So it's their auxiliary function. So why is the auxiliary function? The idea is that introverted thinking, which is that focus on structure, making sense of things, how things all fit together, that is supporting extroverted intuition. So in their explorations, for them to best realize and explore these possibilities, they have to make sense of it. They have to fit it together and see how it all aligns. This is why they are theoretical types. It's not about a personal, subjective, or arbitrary reasons for exploring possibilities. They want to have something which is more objective, more impartial. They want things to fit together and cohere. And so this is a type which is very fluid in their use of introverted thinking to support their extroverted intuition. The extroverted intuition is very much, I want to explore this. I won't be deterred from exploring whatever is possible and keeping things open and getting distracted by all sorts of the interesting alternative stuff and trying to do something which other people haven't done before, something which hasn't been looked at in the same way before. That sort of desire for originality and alternativeness as an ENTP. And then introverted thinking is there ready to help them to explain how it all fits together, how it all makes sense for them, to really align that in a way that's coherent. And they can very rapidly explain and re-explain and explain again as they may shift in their perspectives and ways of thinking. ENTP is a type which, once they've encountered the right reasons and structures, they can actually change their mind. They can change their mind almost quickly. Like suddenly they've changed their mind and suddenly the introverted thinking has to realign rapidly to make sense of a new thing, which makes them very good at explaining things on the spot and very good at then reformulating their explanations as things change. So that's what I say about that introverted thinking. It's not pushed onto people in a rigid way. It's very flexible. It's the extrovert intuition, which is actually quite pushed in terms of that focus on many different possibilities and opening things up. So that's the ego block. Now let's look at the superego block for the ENTP. Now, what is a superego block? This is, rather than being strong and valued, it is what is weak and unvalued, neglected, you could say. This is very much, rather like the ego block, it's also in that public sphere, you could say. It's how we are coming across to others. But here, it is about our failures in public rather than our calling card. This is what people are expecting of us, and we feel forced to have to do it, essentially. So there are two parts of this, SE and FI, extroverted sensing and introverted feeling. So when these are together, this idea of things being quite harsh and personal, that's what the ENTP doesn't like. They don't like very sort of personalized, very serious confrontations of individuals over their character. They don't like that. ENTPs are explorers. They are inventors. They don't like to have conflict and make things personal against others. That's not their style. So first of all, we have the role function. And the role function is more flexible. It's more able to adapt to the expectations. ENTPs are often quite aware they need to be tougher. They need to be stronger in a world which demands willpower and persistence in achieving more materialistic goals. ENTPs know they have to go out and do that. They have to actually be tough to some degree. It is a drain on an ENTP to have to do that. These are not types which like to sustain their willpower, because as soon as they get interested in something else, their natural response is to pursue the new possibility. They have that magpie personality. So this idea that you have to actually take things head on rather than be indirect and seek all the other alternative ways you can think about a situation, that's not very natural. So ENTPs feel almost dirty utilizing extroverted sensing and being tough and being pushy and confronting people directly. But they can do it. When they do it, they're better at using it with introverted thinking to help. So they can enforce rules. They need an objective reason for why they should be doing this and asserting themselves in this way. And but doing it too much can tire them out. What they can't do very well, though, is introverted feeling, which is the vulnerable function. So this is meant to support extroverted sensing. It's meant to allow the ENTP to use harsh judgment of individuals. But because it's in the vulnerable function, it can't do that. It's a complete blind spot. It refuses to budge. And what that means is that ENTPs almost cannot bring themselves to acknowledge these negative personal attitudes towards people. They can recognize moods and emotions, but not say, I despise that individual and that person's character. If you ask them who they like, who they dislike in a very personal way, they'll lean towards finding something more objective to say, like some sort of structure or checklist, or simply look at what other people are feeling and saying. Because it's very hard for them to come up with very personal reasons to say no to things. Not saying, oh, I don't like this, I don't feel comfortable about this. It's not something they need to be often can actually say, even though they might actually feel uncomfortable about something. They find it hard to almost admit it and talk about it. And it's very often you find that ENTP is often quite hard to offend for a similar sort of reason. They don't like to admit they might be offended and that there's a personal, subjective, arbitrary reason for not to do something. So introverted feeling is quite hard for an ENTP. They often struggle to maintain close bonds and relationships with other people. Whereas they can be, assertive sometimes. They're not very assertive, depends on what pressure they're under. They can adapt to the demands of them to some degree. Introverted feeling is not adaptive. So you may find they may be overly familiar with strangers or overly distant from their best friends. They may struggle to maintain friendships over a long period of time. Some ENTPs, if they're not aware of these difficulties, could also have a string of failed marriages even, which has been seen in a few famous examples. So yes, introverted feeling is very, very difficult for an ENTP to engage with, and they don't value it really at all. They don't really recognize it as being important. Some ENTPs go so far as to think that personal character is a myth. They may think that people are simply causally determined in all that they do, or come up with some other theory to explain people which doesn't depend on any kind of personal assessment. So that is the superego block. So let's turn to the super id block. And the super id block, this is still weak, but it is now valued. And it's more private now. So this is the area which is about personal growth and personal aspirations. So in this, you've got SI and FE, introverted sensing and extroverted feeling. So this is that nice, cuddly collection. It's a positive emotionality, people feeling safe and included and accepted. So an ENTP needs this. They want this. They don't know how to create and sustain this themselves. It's not forced on them like the superego. Well, this is what they really want and desire, but they need a bit of help here, and different kinds of help in different kinds of areas. And we can split this up into the suggestive function, which is, again, just as weak as the vulnerable function for the ENTP. And that's introverted sensing, introverted sensation. So ENTPs, because they're so caught up in different ideas and possibilities and how things might be, they aren't very good at being grounded in the day-to-day. They are often out of touch with the needs of their bodies. They often don't look after themselves very well. They may stay up too late. They may go out without a coat. They may not eat for a long time, especially if they're interested in something, or they just very much struggle to realize when their body needs them to actually do something to sustain that homeostasis. They often sit in uncomfortable positions. They do uncomfortable things. They don't often realize. And once they're reminded, then suddenly they'll respond to that and try to do something about it. And often in the pursuit of a sort of blissful existence in that present moment, they want to find that. They want to find that blissful relaxation. And they struggle to find it and sustain it. Yeah, they don't have a great awareness of detail. They are much more about big picture, multiple possibility thinkers. So they need someone who can maintain and sustain around them. And they like that sort of comforting, pleasant environment, because by having that environment, by having a chilled, relaxed, nice, pleasant, tranquil, harmonious experience, which is what they sort of kind of need, that breaks them out of the need to be pushing, to be confronting, to be striving for all these sorts of physical, materialistic goals. For them, this takes the pressure off, and they actually like an environment where the pressure is sort of released. They'll respond to pressure. They'll take on high pressure if they need to, but they like an environment where that's sort of taken care of and it's made softer and more harmonious again. And they're not very good at doing this themselves. They may unintentionally make people uncomfortable, maybe unintentionally be a bit too over the top in things. They don't easily balance. They often verge towards extremes in things. So they kind of need someone else also to tell them that's going to disrupt things. That's going to send things off course. And of course, in terms of a day-to-day pleasantness sort of way. The ENTP needs someone who can sort of point that out to them, so they can keep things more appropriate to the present circumstances and more easily embrace that golden mean in life. Now, the other thing is extroverted feeling as their mobilizing function. So this is a bit different. So ENTPs need to basically outsource introverted sensation to someone else, ideally the nurturer, the ISFP. But an ENTP doesn't need to outsource extroverted feeling. They kind of want to be able to do this themselves. So ENTPs, at least when they start off, they can become quite insufferable with their extroverted feeling because they want to try to provoke all sorts of emotional reactions in other people. An ENTP rarely does something privately. They're often thinking, how can I show this to others? How can I do something that will create reactions in other people? And so this idea of chasing these sort of positive moods from others is something which an ENTP can get very caught up in doing, often quite inappropriately, often in a way which doesn't necessarily lead to the reaction they want. Now, over time, an ENTP can get better at this. They can become better able to pitch themselves in a way that is socially acceptable. And they can become quite charismatic and charming figures, because the idea is that they don't want to just blend in. They want to stand out in a way which is interesting and in a way which comes across well to others and gains that admiration from others. So ENTPs are very public-facing people. Now, that carries certain downsides. By pursuing the public-facing side, they can forget about their personal private lives, which links together with that introverted feeling as being their vulnerable function. So, yeah, that's what I say about the extroverted feeling. A lot of it, you can say that ENTPs push both extroverted intuition and extroverted feeling. So pushing that enthusiasm and excitement about new ideas to explore. That's what an ENTP wants to do. And you often find them in public spaces, maybe perhaps being educators, perhaps becoming comedians, entertainers. ENTPs often like that, with a sort of more nerdy intellectual edge, because they are NT types at the end of the day. Okay, so finally, I turn to the id block. Now, the id block, this is strong now. So it's an area of capability. You can adapt to this if you're an ENTP in unfamiliar situations. So it's strong, but it's not valued. You take this area for granted if you're an ENTP. So that means this can be an area which you fall back on when you're, in less of a safe environment. It can be what you just do for yourself. It's private. You do it for yourself, essentially. It's not something you tend to wave as being, this is my calling card. This is not really exciting enough to you to do it that way. So there are two parts of the id block. First of all, you have the ignoring function, and that is introverted intuition for an ENTP. So ENTPs, because they're so much about expanding the breadth of possibilities, they're quite stubborn in doing that. It's very hard to discourage an ENTP from not opening things up and allowing more potential things to happen. So they don't like the idea of narrowing down possibilities and saying no to possibilities for the sake of it. So an ENTP has to really think there's no possibility of this working for them to actually say, right, I'm not even going to bother in this. This is not going to lead anywhere. This is not going anywhere. That's not to say an ENTP is weak in introverted intuition. They do know which possibilities have weight, which ones are going to go somewhere, which ones are not. They just are averse to using this unless it is in line with their extroverted intuition. So to help them to explore those possibilities with the greatest potential, they will draw from some introverted intuition to see which ones have that long-term potential, which ones don't. But these are not types who are going to cancel out all distractions to focus on the one goal, the one thing of meaning. They might have to force themselves to do that if one possibility is worthwhile enough, but they don't lean towards that. They lean towards breadth, not towards the depth of where things are meant to be going. So yeah, that's what I say about the introverted intuition. ENTPs, if they see the red button, they'll push it. Even if they think it might not work very well, it might lead to a problem. They want to see, just in case, I want to try it out. That's the ENTP mindset. Now, the other thing they use, and they use this a lot more, because introverted intuition is used minimalistically, as I said. What they use a lot more is their demonstrated function. And that is the function which is sort of continuously going in the background. It's every bit as strong and obvious as their leading or dominant function, but it is not valued for its own sake. And for an ENTP, that's extroverted thinking. ENTPs are very able to be very pragmatic problem solvers. They are types which are often can quickly come up with not only an explanation of how things fit together and make sense, but also how it works and how it might be improved. ENTPs often kick back and can relax by absorbing large amounts of factual information. Spending time on Wikipedia just looking stuff up is often what the ENTP might be doing, because for them, absorbing of facts is second nature to them. What they don't do is push this as a thing of importance. They don't think you have to be efficient. You have to work as effectively as possible. You have to be taking on factual information and improving all the time. ENTPs don't place that kind of expectation on others. This is not a valued thing. It's simply neglected, but it's just very strong and ever present. So instead, ENTPs are going to be more playing around with this, learning a lot, and then directing this towards their introverted thinking. When ENTPs are trying their extroverted feeling and that blows up in their face, let's say they say something's inappropriate, some people are always hate it, suddenly start reacting very negatively to them, they may fall back on their extroverted thinking, which is low stakes, low reward, rather than the high stakes, high reward extroverted feeling. And they'll start becoming more factual, more informative, less likely to tell edgy jokes, which could cause a negative reaction. But also the extroverted thinking is working very much with their introverted thinking, which is why an ENTP is able to quickly learn new facts and update their models of understanding and change their mind and make sense of things in this new way and suddenly apply new solutions from that new model or framework. Okay, so that is the all 8 functions of Model A for the ENTP.
Hi, if you're enjoying this video, you'll love the in-depth content found on the Type Mastery Pathway, our comprehensive course. Learn everything I know about socionics in over 20 hours of video lectures across 6 modules, with over 100 video examples. Sign up today by clicking the link in the description below.
The ISFP, the nurturer. Now, when it comes to talking about the introverted types, I'm going to be breaking with the tradition of essentially talking about types where what makes one a J or a P is whichever rational cognitive function is extroverted or not in the top 2. I think that is mental gymnastics, and I completely disagree with it. I think instead, when we talk about an ISFP, instead of talking about the FI leading type, I think instead we should talk about the SI leading type. That is a consistent way of talking about it. If you watch my J versus P video, then you'll see my reasoning for doing so. But I think that the true ISFP leads with introverted sensing, with extroverted feeling in the auxiliary function. So when we talk about SI and FE together in the ego block, which is the part which the type brings to the world, as it were, the part which is strong but also valued, what we get is essentially a focus on things being calm, things being balanced and harmonious, things feeling good, things being nice and pleasant. And the idea here is that you have the sensation and the feeling going together. There's a socio-emotional, socio-physical, socio-emotional aspect of this type, that their environment, but both emotional and physical, is balanced and harmonized in a nice, pleasant way, with both positive moods, positive feeling, and also positive physical experience. So, what we have first of all is the dominant function for the ISFP. That's going to be introverted sensation, as I've said. So, this is about bringing sensation into balance and harmony. So, ISFPs are very much types which do things first and foremost because it's comfortable to do so. They are a type which is very much about avoiding discomfort. They don't like things being stressful, rushed, fast paced, aggressive, anything like that. They will be the ones protesting and making sure that things are brought back into a calm and harmony. They are the creators of peace. They are the ones who smooth over the rough edges of life, you could say. And support and helping them with this is their strong eye for detail, knowing when things are out of place, when things aren't quite right, and how to put things back together again in a way that is harmonious and pleasant to experience, both for themselves and for others in their immediate vicinity. um, ISFPs are very attentive and aware of when people are feeling a little bit off and when things are a little bit out of kilter, and how to bring things back to that golden mean of balance, which is a very key thing for ISFPs, which is why they're known for being these sorts of aesthetes, people who like surround themselves with beauty, who like to create environments of that perfect harmony and equilibrium of their sensory experience. Now, supporting the introverted sensation is the extroverted feeling. ISFPs are very aware and adaptive to the mood and the emotions around them. These aren't types who are likely to be the center of attention, but they are very much types who are likely to blend in to their social surroundings, to find the right way of expressing how they feel, that allows them to easily blend in, allows them to remove tension from a social atmosphere, allows them to get on with all sorts of different kinds of people because they tend to be quite warm and friendly. They're happy to be happy to bring their sense of humor to the fore. They tend to but you're just cheerful, nice, friendly people. No one tends to dislike ISFPs because they come across well to others. They're good at managing and fitting in with their emotions. It's not, again, to stand out. It's not to manage the room around them. It's more of a subtle fitting in approach, subtly changing the mood to make things more calm, more relaxed, more enjoyable around them. And yes, they can be quite positively expressive. They can certainly be a type who knows how to, when around more emotionally expressive individuals, able to sort of reflect the right sort of emotions back at them, as it were, to essentially be liked by all. So that's the ego block. Now we turn to the super ego block for ISFPs. So ISFPs, where they are weak and what they do not value, is in the realm of the long-term, more strategic way of looking at things. How are things going to be developing over the long run in sort of a factual, how will it work out kind of way? This is tend to be an area that's quite stressful for an ISFP to have to think about. Now, first of all, we have the role function. And for ISFPs, their role function is introverted intuition. So it's not really natural for an ISFP to detach from the day to day. These are types who are very much about being and savoring and enjoying that present moment. So to have to detach from the day to day, to be removed from their immediate experiences, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel nice for them to do so. But they can do it. They can think forwards. They can wonder where things are going in the long run. Often it's because of some sort of socially created reason. ISFPs, again, tend to be very good at blending in. They don't tend to ruffle the feathers of people around them. So they may think that, okay, we need to be looking ahead. We need to be seeing problems in the long run. And ISFP may find themselves worrying about what may be coming along the future and thinking, okay, where could things later down the line become uncomfortable, become unpleasant? It's very important for an ISFP to sort of look after their day to day, to keep things nice. So the fact that the future could be unpleasant is going to be alarming to them to some degree. Now, this means that they can, yes, think ahead if needed, but that's not ideal for them to be thinking in sort of linear, often quite a negative future kind of way. What then doesn't really help them when utilizing introverted intuition is their extroverted thinking. You see, ISFPs, they can think ahead more in terms of the social ramifications. What may people think? How may people react to them? They are likely to think ahead in that sort of way when they are thinking in the long term. But when it comes to the extroverted thinking, this is where this is a blind spot. Suddenly, the ISFP is quite unable to utilize their introverted intuition in a way that is blocked with extroverted thinking. How will things work out practically over the long run? This is where an ISFP doesn't know what to do. And often they can find that large amounts of factual information, especially when detached from their present in the moment experiences, can be very hard for them to mentally digest. They can find there's too much information. They find their brain can sort of shut down with too many facts that could be read in books and that sort of thing. And they are much likely to prefer gradually digesting and absorbing things and trying it out in the moment in their day-to-day experiences. So often you'll find that an ISFP may disagree with things which they may find in books, which may say how things ought to work in the long run. They haven't experienced it that way. It doesn't really make sense to them, essentially. And so they may be quite slow to adopt and improve how things are working around them, utilizing extroverted thinking. They are types that want to keep things nice, find their comfort zones of being and understanding. So this idea we have to suddenly relentlessly improve how things work, how things are operating, that's going to be quite disconcerting to an ISFP. These aren't the ones who are going to be suddenly changing up all their practices just to meet a target. They are going to be wanting to go at their own natural pace in life, keeping things pleasant, keeping things chilled, not trying to be at optimum efficiency, and having to quickly learn and revise how they understand something in order to be more efficient and more effective in the long run. That's not going to be an easy sell to an ISFP. So yeah. Now, when we get to the super id block, this is where we get to what is still quite weak in the ISFP, but what they kind of like. They actually respond very well to this combination. This is the combination, rather than being about strategic planning and how things ought to be done more effectively over time. This is about theory. This is about how things can fit together and make sense in a way that helps to bring the world around them to life in the more interesting and unexpected and sometimes surprising way. Now, this is the thing. When we were talking about the ISFP as being sort of worried about how the future will turn out, they can sometimes get this idea of things turning out in a negative way. What can free them from this idea of this being the only way that they're sort of tied into or locked into? What frees them is a consideration of alternative perspectives, alternative ideas, new ways of looking at things. Now, for an ISFP, they're not very good at this. This is quite a very weak area for them. They're very much grounded in their day-to-day experiences. It's be quite difficult for them to think outside of those experiences, see things from a completely new lens, a completely different point of view. That's difficult. But they greatly appreciate those who can turn things on its head, who can suggest new things they'd never thought about ever before. They like to have their understanding of the world broadened with new ideas and new perspectives. They just don't know how to do that themselves. They don't know how to navigate that ambiguity and conceptual complexity without locking in on one likely outcome that is going to be going forwards. To have all the different possibilities at their fingertips is a deeply rewarding experience, but something they will feel much more comfortable being guided through by someone who is more natural at exploring all these different kinds of possibilities and tangents. But yes, an ISFP is a type that is looking forward to being surprised and finding something new to add to their zone of familiarity. They don't like the facts. They don't like having huge amounts of quite boring and sort of quite pedantic factual information heaped upon them. But they do like to be shown something new and interesting. It's a key and quite subtle difference there. Now, what they benefit from greatly as well is introverted thinking. This is about structuring, making sense of things, creating models to explain how everything fits together. And this an ISFP will prefer to do more themselves, whereas they want an extroverted, intuitive type to show them the new possibilities outside of their familiarity. When it comes to introverted thinking, they will be wanting to create those conceptual models to make sense of things for themselves, to find out how things fit together in a way which makes sense to them. And that's very important. Things making sense to them rather than being shown in some sort of study they've never seen or ever heard of to work, supposedly. ISFPs get quite suspicious when people say things. It is known that this works. This is how it will improve how things function. And ISFP will be more inclined to say, well, in my experiences, I found this works perfectly fine. So they can be quite stubborn in their thinking, and they may come up with certain models, certain frameworks through which they may understand things almost entirely. And they may perhaps get quite zealous to some degree in pushing that sense of how things are right, how things are meant to fit together. This is how this is meant to be done. This is how things fit together. That is not the way. This is the way. They may get quite pushy on this being the particular way that fits together, that makes sense for them based on what they have come to know and understand. The idea is when you have all that factual complexity, it is far easier for an ISFP to really put that into some sort of coherent model or coherent framework. That simplifies it down, makes it easier to understand, easier to make sense of. And that is how an ISFP is able to develop that intellectual confidence And once they have that, you find that ISFPs often can become experts in particular niche areas of practice. They like to have their structure, like to have their way of seeing it and understanding how it works. And then they may become a bit protective over this as well. Because the idea for an ISFP is that they hate to be put in the situation, especially under pressure, where they may come across as stupid to others. They don't like being required to come up with all the facts in front of them and present that on the fly. They may need to prepare for that sort of environment. But where things are logically entailed from other founding principles, that simplifies the data to the point where they can very easily grasp that and utilize that and know, based on the structure, based on the framework, what the next decision ought to be in the way that makes sense. Okay, so now we turn finally to the id block. So this is an area of strength again for an ISFP, not weakness, but it's not valued. It is something which is kept quite private for the ISFP. It's not something which they tend to wave around or push onto their environment. So two parts to this. Again, we have, first of all, the ignoring function. So you think of SC and FI together. This is this sort of more political way of thinking. Who can I trust? Who can I how can I actually build allies to protect me and my independence from others? And how can I be aware of bad character? Those sorts of things, SC and FI together. So when it comes to an ISFP, what they ignore very much is their extroverted sensation. ISFPs are capable of being quite assertive people, if need be, in those rare occasions where introverted sensation needs them to be more assertive. But for the large majority of the time, ISFPs are gentle souls. They are types that avoid conflict if they can avoid it. They try to keep things peaceful, calm, nice, want everyone around them to be enjoying themselves as well and just balanced and peaceful. They get uncomfortable if other people get pushy and start impacting on the environment in an overly assertive way. So, what you'll find with an ISFP, though, is when they are made to be uncomfortable enough, when the only way for them to bring things back into comfort, back into balance and harmony, is for them to actually get assertive. That's when they'll get assertive. That's where you'll see that flash of sudden temper for an ISFP. And that can be remarkably more assertive than you would have expected from them. But it is there. They have that capacity. They are not pushovers. This is the thing of ISFPs. They can actually be quite tough people. And they certainly don't like people trying to rush them. They will quite assertively insist of keeping things at the pace that is comfortable for them. You do not rush an ISFP. They will go at the pace they want to go at because sensation for them is stubborn. So for them, extrovert sensation bounces off them. They have no interest in responding to it unless they are uncomfortable. Then they'll sort it out, and then they'll go back to it being peaceful and nice and pleasant once again. So yes, now what you see a lot more of though for an ISFP is their introverted feeling. Now ISFPs, they don't like to show or market their personal judgment of people and situations. Nevertheless, they are very aware of what they like and what they dislike. Whether they trust you or they don't trust you, they know this. They can read character very quickly in an individual. However, they don't stick to that personal assessment at the expense of a social environment around them. For them, the emotional space is what is most important rather than the personal attitudes. So an ISFP in an environment will put aside personal considerations to keep things nice, to keep things pleasant. They are not party poopers. ISFP. The only time an ISFP might be a party pooper is when they're tired and then they want to go to bed and they want to keep things relaxing because for them, their comfort comes first and foremost, even over the social environment. But when it comes to introverted feeling, no, they'll keep things pleasant, they'll keep things happy, even if they don't particularly like the person. They will put that to one side because extroverted feeling is what's actually valued. Nevertheless, they know how to form close one-to-one relationships with others. They're very good at setting the intimacy that they want with each individual around them. And by forming these one-to-one connections with an attention to the group atmosphere, they're very good at forming these clusters and circles of friends. They could have a number of different circles, and each one is based on different individuals they like and actually have brought together in a certain natural club or community for regular social activities. So they balance both kinds of feeling very well, very effectively, which is why they make such good close friends of people. It's why they rarely fall out with people. They know how to manage both the one-to-one relationship and also the social moods that they're coming across well, with that diplomatic understanding. But yes, these types are more about the enjoyment of the experience rather than preserving their one-to-one attitudes absolutely at the expense of the social environment around them. So that's all I have to say about the ISFP.
Me again. The Type Mastery Pathway awaits. We're currently offering the course at a 50% discount, so consider signing up before the time runs out. To find out more, click the link in the description below.
ESFJ, the host. So why is the ESFJ called the host? It's because they are perhaps the type most inclined to want to create an environment of positivity, of hospitality, of a desire to welcome others around them, to create a positive space for people to enjoy themselves. So this is the most hosty, the most hospitable of all the types, the one most inclined to want to be at the center of running things for people to be enjoying themselves. And essentially, again, like with all the different types, you have the 4 blocks. And starting with the ego block, you have extroverted feeling and introverted sensing, which, like with the ISFP, is a combination that is about that sort of emotional positivity, about creating that nice, pleasant, friendly, enjoyable space. However, the emphasis now is more on the extroverted feeling and less on the introverted sensation. And that takes us to the dominant function, which is extroverted feeling for the ESFJ. The point about ESFJ is that it's all about their mood. It's all about the emotionality, the environment that they can influence with their emotionality. So these are types which are, unsurprisingly, often very emotional, often quite inclined to be emotionally expressive, although not always. I find less so with males. I think with men, when there's a social expectation to be less emotionally effervescent, you may find that an ESFJ may have grown up in that sort of environment. They may be less openly emotive, less hysterical, you could say. But there's a general idea for ESFJs to be very much about how are they coming across with their emotional expressions. And rather than simply blend in to their social surroundings, they're more the trendsetters. They're the ones who like to make sure everyone's having a good time, and they are putting in whatever they can to make sure that the emotion around them is a positive, friendly, exciting one. And the reason for this is that because their extroverted feeling is blocked with introverted sensation, which is so here, their auxiliary function, that flavors how the extroverted feeling manifests. It's more about being nice quality, pleasant, enjoyable. So it's not as intense as some other extroverted feeling types. It's more about people having fun and enjoying the present moment. So what you'll find is that the ESFJ setting that very positive mood, being the sort of person who wants to make sure everyone's having fun, everyone's enjoying themselves, everyone's being included. They are also working with their physical space, balancing the finer details, the bringing of different elements together in their immediate environment. They're doing that for the sake of creating that positive, friendly mood. They're doing it for the sake of making sure that people are enjoying themselves. You may think of the stereotypical example of an ESFJ being someone who will make sure that everyone is well fed, perhaps even stuffed to some degree, can be running all the different social activities and making sure that everyone is having fun around them. And in general, being this sort of very sort of maternal figure but not necessarily maternal. If it's a bloke, perhaps but it's more of an entertainer, perhaps more of a talk show host, that kind of stereotype. The one that wants to create a positivity. You think of someone like Walt Disney as being another example of an ESFJ wanting to create the happiest place on earth. The main focus here is, again, this idea of creating positivity in their environment. And ESFJs are frequently very charismatic individuals, able to bring people together and create a positive consensus around them. Often very much about radiating out their sense of humor. But also, these are types which, again, is no matter not being intense, it being friendly, nice, pleasant. So balanced, of nice quality. That's the main focus, I'd say, for the ego block, for the ESFJ. But now we turn to the super ego block. And this is what, rather than being strong and valued, this is what is weak and unvalued or neglected by the ESFJ. And that is, again, like with the ISFP, it is putting together extroverted thinking and introverted intuition. So again, it's that more strategic, how will things work in the long run side. And ESFJs, they're not inclined to like this aspect. They see this as sort of party pooping, getting in the way of the positivity they're trying to create. So what you'll find for ESFJs is they're naturally quite collectivistic in their nature. They like to say yes to things. They like people to be positive and also united. And this sort of more sort of independently critical style of extroverted thinking and introverted intuition is going to be quite off-putting to an ESFJ. Now, within this, you have the role function, which is where the ESFJ is able to adapt where there is an external need for them to do so. And ESFJs will do the factual stuff. They will do stuff that's pragmatic. They won't like letting people down. So they'll try their best to be competent, to be capable. Not because they like getting involved in all the facts and nitty-gritties of how things work. No, they like things to be exciting. They like things to be fun. For them, fun's most important. But if they are worried that the sort of the present circumstances and the mood depends on them actually being practical and competent and actually doing things effectively, they will take in that information that's needed to do that effectively. So you can think of ESFJs being often being found in even in the business environment, managing all the processes well, making sure it's effective, updating their knowledge bases where needed. Although, again, they can find themselves out of their depth in this area at times. But what really makes this difficult for an ESFJ, because they're good at managing things in the day-to-day, they're good at the more grounded aspect of practicality. It's when it's drawing on their vulnerable function, which is introverted intuition, that things get a lot more difficult. Because for ESFJs, they really struggle with this idea that there is some sort of long-term outcome, some sort of determined, end result that is inevitable, that is out of their ability to change. ESFJs are types which feel that if they simply believe enough, if they simply are enthusiastic enough, they put enough of their effort in, they can accomplish almost any of their wildest dreams. So this idea that something was never going to work is something which an ESFJ will really struggle with. And they don't like being told that something is a bad idea, something's going to lead to problems further down the line, because they don't see things in terms of the problems further down the line. ESFJs live in the moment, and they're about appreciating that moment and having fun in that moment. So they really struggle with this idea that all the different possibilities can narrow down to one outcome, and that outcome is not the positive one. So they are less inclined to listen to people, to forecasts of where things will go. They will try to preserve the optimism of trying for the best, even when that actually may be a doomed cause. And they will not see or recognize it as being that doomed cause. No, and sometimes they may simply act in a very sort of short-termist view as a result, and not like people taking away the positivity around their quite short-termist plan. So yeah, that's what I'd say about ESFJs and their super ego block. Yes, and then we turn to the super id block. This is what is valued, but is also what is weak. So ESFJs, They value introverted thinking and extroverted intuition. They like and they seek those with a theoretical understanding of how things fit together. They want to understand things in a more intellectual way rather than a strategic how things will work in the long run kind of way. So they're looking for that person who's they like brain boxes. They like people with that kind of insight to really make sense of things for them. That is very refreshing for an ESFJ to interact with. And they may be the sort of person who will go around and find very sort of smart people and bring them together and benefit from their knowledge. ESFJs have no defensiveness over their intellect. They're happy to not be the smartest or deepest person in the room. The introverted intuition vulnerable function means they often can lack that depth. They can be quite superficial, but they're happy not being the smartest person in the room. They are the showman. They are the ones which make people feel great about themselves. So when it comes to their suggestive function, that's going to be the introverted thinking. ESFJs seek introverted thinking from others. They want others to make sense of the world for them. They want people to help to set out what the key and most important priorities are. How do things fit together? What is the philosophy that should be guiding our actions and making sense of it all? An ESFJ on their own, they're very emotional a lot of the time. Their emotions, their mood, the feel, the buzz, the positive energy of a room, that's what drives them naturally. So actually detaching and thinking about what the principles and structures are to how this ought to be is not their natural go-to, but it is what they can become very enamored with when provided by others. And you may find ESFJs sometimes joining movements or ideologies where there is some kind of philosophy. Think of some of the ESFJs who've joined some of these more cult-like religions, such as Scientology, for instance. They can get really sucked into that sort of thing because it provides a logical clarity which they covet and really appreciate. So ESFJs often have a sort of pet philosophy, something which they've learned from someone else, which they get very excited about, and they want to get everyone excited and involved in whatever that pet philosophy might be, and they may sort of parrot very enthusiastically its underlying tenets. So yes, that's the suggestive function, and what an ESFJ wants to sort of take on and do more of themselves, though, is the extroverted intuition. That's their mobilizing function. They are types who want to become more varied, more interesting individuals, more able to be creative and find new ways of making people excited about the world. ESFJs share with ENTPs that tendency to push both extroverted intuition and extroverted feeling. So they're both very much yes people as opposed to no people. They are the most extremely yes oriented. They will say yes. Why not do this? Why? Let's not be negative. Let's not turn down good things. We need to be optimistic about it, and we should say yes to it. So that this applies to their approach to possibilities. ESFJs will also want to expand possibilities. The problem is ESFJs lack any sense of introverted intuition. So when they use extroverted intuition, it's sort of superficial in the possibilities they come up with. They have no idea which possibilities actually have weight and which ones don't. So you may find that if an ESFJ is trying to accomplish something, what they'll end up doing is they'll plan for every single possibility that could come to mind, no matter how unlikely it might be, because they simply can't see what will inevitably happen. They only see what the possibilities are when they've developed their extroverted intuition. Nevertheless, ESFJs like to grow into people who actually allow others to flourish by actually taking a step back and allowing some of the other possibilities to bloom, not being so involved in everything all the time, but allowing possibilities, becoming more tolerant. And they ideally want to be welcoming to people of all different backgrounds, all different kinds. These are the types which are most naturally excited by the idea of diversity and inclusion. This extroverted intuition provides that inclusivity. The idea of belonging, everyone coming together, is very much one of including all different kinds, all different points of view together in a single harmony. So yes, in a way, this idea of ESFJ is perhaps the most sort of collectivistic out of all the types. You could say that ISFP and ENTP, and when I talk about INTJ as well, they are also quite collectivistic. But it's this general idea that they want everyone to come together and basically have a positive, fun time and be aligned in what they believe in, but letting in all the different differences and have that discussed and have a consensus formed where everything can be aligned. So ESFJs, with that extrovert intuition, become far more open-ended in who they let into their group, essentially. So, having talked about that, I would like to go towards the id block. So, the id block of ESFJ, this is what is not valued, it's neglected, but it's actually strong now. So, for the ESFJ, they have the capacity to be very they're still quite very sort of socially intelligent people. They are aware of the character of others. They're aware of how to push things with others. But the key thing here is that they don't like it when things get too serious. These are types who like things to be positive and friendly and enjoyable. So when something gets personal and harsh, they do not like that at all, and they're going to try to stop that sort of personal thing from killing the buzz of the party. Nevertheless, they understand the underlying politics of their interactions. They can get a read of people. They know where and how much to push someone to get what they want to do. They can engage in that side, but they'd much rather put a very positive spin on what they're doing because they want things to be nice and friendly in a sort of overt way. So that takes me to, first of all, the ignoring function, which is introverted feeling. So ESFJs, they lead with extroverted feeling. So for them, it's about the mood, the expression, what the buzz is, that group energy. They are people who perform. They're people who are about how they're coming across to all, their reputation, the positive sense they're creating. They are not types which tend to prioritize the close personal one-to-one relationships so much. They are able to read their distances with others. They're able to close that gap with others and build intimacy should they wish to. That's not usually their focus. And so they can do a lot of public facing stuff, but give less attention to their private lives as a result. It's not that it's a blind spot, it's not like the ENTP and they just can't see what they're doing. ESFJs kind of know, but just less important to them compared to their public facing side. They are born for the crowd. They are not so much for the small, tight knit one to one, you could say. And so ESFJs, they definitely have a sense of their personal attitudes towards others, but they won't make that judgmental side the focus. They'd much rather talk about how to manage the mood, and if they're upset with something, they won't simply be content to talk about how they feel towards the person. They're going to want to create that into a mood. How does everyone feel about this? Because that is where values derive from the mood around them, not their personal attitudes. So that's talking about introverted feeling. But also we have extroverted sensing, and that's the demonstrated function. So this is what ESFJs use very frequently. Whereas an ESFJ may utilize introverted feeling only when in service of extroverted feeling. Right? Build the close connections for the sake of helping to actually foster a more positive group mood feel, and not cause a broken relationship to disrupt the mood they're creating. When it comes to extroverted sensing, they're using this all the time. It's just in the background. ESFJs can sometimes be a bit much. They have a lot of presence. They have a lot of energy to them. And it's not that they enjoy pushing things around. It's not that they are combat or conflict oriented. It's not that they very much want to smooth over the space around them. Nevertheless, they take charge naturally and quite a lot. They almost can't help themselves. They almost can't help but press upon their surroundings with their very strong, very effervescent personalities. So you'll find that ESFJs can get sometimes unintentionally can smother what other people are doing because they just get so involved. They may seem to be running almost everything because they're getting busy with everything and trying to make things positive. So they almost do too much. They don't easily restrain that aspect of themselves because they're not seeing it in terms of a fight to be had. They just have a lot of energy and they can get things done. And they have this almost implicit belief that they can almost accomplish anything if they believe enough and if they're passionate enough about it. And they have the energy to make that happen. They have the energy to keep going. They're almost indefatigable because they have both extroverted sensing and introverted sensing working together. So they keep things well sustained. They tend to live they tend to retain their fitness even into their old age, and can tend to always keep going like a sort of energizer bunny. They just never really tire out. Even if they do want to rest, they know exactly when to rest and how much because of the introverted sensing. So they keep going, but they can often be a bit too much. Also, I'd say is that when they're in a good spot, they'll become more open, they'll become more likely to tolerate different things and allow different points of view, which is what they want to be doing. But when that doesn't work out, a more harsh authoritarian side can come out. And ESFJs can be quite tough and quite commanding if they lose their temper. And if they lose their temper, my goodness, that can be very scary for an ESFJ. You see a very you see a very sort of aggressive side in those rare moments. So yes, as I say about extroverted sensing for an ESFJ.
You might not be ready to purchase the Type Mastery Pathway all at once. That's fine. If you want to get a taster, you can now purchase specific modules one at a time. How about Module 4, which looks at every one of the 16 types in depth, including how they adapt and change their behaviour across different situations? Find out more by clicking the link in the description below.
The INTJ, the analyst. Now, as you may have already known from my Explained Correctly series, I'm going to be talking about the real INTJ, not the one you may have encountered in some MBTI profiles. When I say INTJ, I'm talking about a type which leads with a judging function, which should be, in the case of the INTJ, introverted thinking, rather than introverted intuition, which I would say is actually INTP. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, the real INTJ, not the fake INTJ. So what is a real INTJ? The analyst. So the ego block. Again, this is the idea that this is what the type brings to the world. It's what they're strong at. It's what they value as well. And that is introverted thinking and extroverted intuition together. So when that's together, it creates a very theoretical focus for the INTJ. The analyst is analytical. They want to understand how everything fits together, how everything makes sense. They want to come up with certain theories or explanations to make sense of how everything fits together. Everything is connected in some way. There's some kind of underlying structure. And if you can just come up with the perfect theory to make sense of everything, well, wouldn't that be wonderful? So INTJs, like ENTPs, are both focused on that theoretical explorational space. And first of all, we have that dominant function. That is going to be the introverted thinking side. So INTJs are very much about structure. It's not about imposing organization onto their surroundings. They're not very good at that. It's more a sense of an orderliness of their thinking. It's a making sense of how the different facts and propositions around them actually fit together. INTJs are concerned with theoretical elegance, with ideas actually cohering, actually being consistent in some way. Now, they're not necessarily very certain that they've happened across the absolutely true theory, but they are very much a type which is looking at what theories there are and thinking, something doesn't quite make sense here. This could actually there is something underlying to this. There's something which doesn't quite fit. Something's not quite consistent. And so INTJs are often types which like to sort of, not necessarily like, but tend to almost pick apart theories that aren't well enough put together. you could say, and they are very inclined to try to build their own understanding. And it could take quite a while for them to really feel confident in that structure which they put forth. But the point is, they really are attracted to some kind of axiomatic truth, whether it's in mathematics or that's in philosophy, or that's even in theology. Anything where there's some kind of underlying structure to what's going on, some kind of beautiful system. And so they're very much inclined to form certain models or frameworks or theories to make sense of things. They're existing very much in that theoretical space. And supporting their introverted thinking is extroverted intuition. INTJs are very eclectic and quite open-minded types. They're never quite sure, they're never quite certain of what they think. Instead, it's more of a sort of questioning space. They like to turn things over, look at ideas from different viewpoints and perspectives, and they often just continue to turn ideas over in their heads. They're very academic in that way, writing a discourse where they are questioning this from that angle, questioning it from this angle, slightly doubting, not quite being absolutely sure. It's very much what an INTJ will do. And as they question, they'll start to tease things apart. They'll start to see how it could actually be like this rather than like that. And as they turn it over in a sort of kaleidoscope of understanding, they're trying to find those natural symmetries, those natural structures which actually make sense. And this makes them very able to form very profound insights into how things really do fit together. Not that they'll necessarily tell you too dogmatically. So yeah, now we get to the superego block. And the superego block, this is what's not valued. It is not a place of strength for an INTJ. So this together is a very sort of political and more sort of socially judgmental space. INTJs do not feel comfortable in this, they don't feel safe in such an environment where there's a lot of personal judgment going on. For INTJs, they'd much rather do away with the political side to things. They'd rather there just be an environment of reason and an open discussion. They can feel a bit naive in such a space. But first of all, we have the role function for the INTJ, which is essentially introverted feeling. It's they don't like the personally arbitrary and subjective. INTJs are principle oriented rather than personal attitude oriented. So when they can often construct quite a strong morality. There's often the misconception that it's the introverted feeling types that construct a morality. The INTJs will do it as well. They will, but for them, it's about a principle. It's about a structure or a guide or a philosophy which does not bend and contort for each individual. Instead, the rules apply across all the different situations. So they like philosophy. They can be quite religious. They can be quite very philosophical. They may have their principles very much. But when it comes about personal one-to-one relationships, that can almost muddy the waters. It can almost compromise their principles. And that's a hard thing for an INTJ to have to sort of handle. They feel as if they almost are sullying themselves to some degree by forming too close connections to certain people, and then suddenly there's a pressure or an expectation on them to be less than their impartial selves. And INTJs are very much about remaining impartial with their introverted thinking. But they can build and maintain and sustain their relationships. They are aware enough of their personal attitudes to manage this to some degree. What they really struggle to do, what is their main blind spot, you could say, is in their vulnerable function, their extroverted sensation. INTJs are people of reason, not of force. They don't understand the idea of might equals right, and they very much struggle to connect to that way of thinking. So INTJs, as I said, would much rather reason with people. That can leave them very much open to the forcefulness of other people who might seek to gain an advantage or might seek to turn people against them. An INTJ might be quite defenseless in such a situation. And they might not realize when the political reality around them actually is turning against them. INTJs may very much misjudge what kind of political power they might have if they're in a position of leadership, for instance. and they might simply follow what they think their principles are guiding them to do, even if the practical realities, or rather the actual power dynamics, are not in their favor. The idea to an INTJ of actually forcing people to do things, as I said, is very alien to them. They definitely avoid as much as possible the feeling of an authority over them and forcing them to compromise on themselves and their principles and what they are personally about. So they may often stay away from any sort of system which they may think could become oppressive in some kind of way. And they may overly fear that to some degree because they don't easily judge the actual levels of power which could be used against them. In general, these are very gentle souls, and they believe often very strongly in not encouraging any kind of action of aggression. Many can be very pacifistic, often to the extreme. So yes, at the same time, it doesn't mean the 90Js can't say lose their temper. It's just it becomes a sort of more sort of a lashing out of a last defense sort of thing. They don't really understand how to utilize what leverage they actually have in any situation. That can create a certain naivety to the INTJ. Yes, and a certain hypersensitivity, one could say, when other people can be overly sort of boisterous, overly pressing upon them in a sort of forceful way. That can be quite difficult to some INTJs. So now we get to the super id block. This is what is valued and still, though, what is weak. So this is extroverted feeling and introverted sensation. So INTJs are looking for those positive emotions, that environment of inclusivity, of feeling part of things and feeling at home and feeling safe in their present environment. That's very important to an INTJ to have, and not often something they actually end up getting, unfortunately. So first of all, we have the suggestive function, which is extroverted feeling. So INTJs, what they really need from other people is to feel that warmth and positivity. If you pay an INTJ a compliment, that can make their day. They're very easy to flatter. They like a sort of supportive, welcoming, positive attention on them. Now, the problem is they're not very good at actually commanding attention. They lack any kind of physical presence because extroverted sensation is their blind spot, but also not so good at actually channeling how they're coming across in a way that is charismatic. They can often come across as a bit dry, a bit sort of, you could say, a bit nerdy or geeky. So a lot of the time, they're not good at actually coming across in a compelling way. So they often don't hold people's attention. And the problem for an INTJ, and sometimes they can have a great deal of anxiety around extroverted feeling. For this reason, they can often come to the fear that people are just going to hate them as soon as they open their mouths. And there's extreme maladaptation in some INTJs who develop more avoidant personality traits. They may hide away from all kinds of social interaction, not because they don't like people. No, INTJs want to feel included. They want to feel part of things, but they fear so much the potential embarrassment of going out there and then actually failing publicly and socially, and being essentially having their fears confirmed to them that they really are hated by everyone. So they're more likely to actually hide away. They need someone else to take the front foot in including them in their social environment. So yes, now we turn to the suggestive. Turn away from the suggestive function to the mobilizing function. We get to introverted sensation. So this is what an INTJ is more likely to want to work on for themselves. INTJs, they can be quite pernickety. As they develop over time, they become more detail aware. And for them, the idea of making their theories and views of the world harmonious, elegant, to have a certain aesthetic. The idea that symmetry is not only mathematically or axiomatically correct, but it's also something which is aesthetically beautiful. That is very much an attraction for many INTJs. The idea that theories can have a beauty to them, that the math can have curves to it, you could say. The sensory experience is important to an INTJ, and that delicate balancing of the sensory harmony around them is very important. Often an INTJ will try to create in their environment that safe space, and unfortunately can get quite stressed when that safe space is disrupted by more forceful actions of others, or just the general chaos of life. That can stress them out. Things in their physical environment being moved, things going wrong in a sort of day-to-day practical, can make them lose their tempers quite a bit. Good example, say King Charles, actually, King Charles the third, and his pen sort of leaking over him, and getting quite upset about that. That kind of the day-to-day pernickety things can get to them. They need things to be in flow and in harmony. They don't like stress in this environment, because that is what is most likely to, well, stress them out, essentially. What else can I say about the INTJ in this area? So as they grow and develop, so they become more detail aware, they become more also aware of their presentness in the environment around them. They become more connected to nature. They're more able to take their very sort of ivory tower academic ideas and start to connect them up to something which feels holistic. And that's really the point about INTJs, right? They're trying to bring things together. They started by bringing things together conceptually, but what they want to be able to do is to bring things together in an experiential way as well. You can think of INTJs as they become more well developed, they may turn towards something like farming, or something like garden arrangements, or things which are more in the physical, but having the structure manifest in the physical and the aesthetic. That's where an INTJ feels most fulfilled, you could say. So yeah, now we turn finally to the id block, and this is where what an INTJ is strong at, but they do not actually value. So for an INTJ, I said this is extroverted thinking and introverted intuition. That's what they don't value, because again, they value extroverted intuition, introverted thinking. So what we have here, this is the very sort of skeptical, pragmatic, and task-oriented and strategic way of thinking. So INTJs are theoretical types. They are not pragmatic types, you could say. So for them, it's about finding the perfect theory to explain everything, and they may take a very long time to find that theory. They're the most judicious of all types, right? They're least likely to make a quick decision. If we go back to extroverted sensation, they often struggle to make any kind of decision, because for them it's about turning it over in their heads. But in the same way, they're not interested in, well, how's this going to meet our goals? Are we on target? That sort of thing. It's not really that concern. Not really a concern for an INTJ. So when we turn to the ignoring function, we have extroverted thinking. So INTJs are not pragmatic types. They're very capable of taking in factual information and knowing how to apply it effectively. They can update their understanding with new facts. They don't tend to like to, and they tend to find that they want to find that factual information which is not necessarily practical, but rather which informs their structures and the theories and frameworks they're trying to build, the models through which they're trying to understand the universe. INTJs are interested in how we go about doing this and accomplishing this. That is, the how question is not important to them. It's a why question is very important to them, but how questions tend to bore them quite a lot. These types are interested in the grand theory or structure of the universe, not necessarily how the five most efficient ways of tying your shoelaces or anything like that, or how you run a company efficiently and make lots of money. INTJs are interested in that sort of thing. They're not how to do. They are, why is it there in the first place, you could say. So This can mean that INTJs can be less willing to look at the data and build their understanding purely based on looking at the data. Instead, they're more likely to think based on first principles. How do things fit together and make sense? How do things work philosophically? They're more naturally towards that rather than the sort of purely empirical or purely commercial way of thinking. Now we have introverted intuition. That's the demonstrative function. So the INTJ does use this a lot more than their extroverted thinking. They're very deep, very analytical, very reflective kinds of people. They think long and hard about things. Where is it going? What is the underlying meaning to it? What is the significance of this way of looking at it as opposed to this? So they are concerned with significance. But however, they don't value this for its own sake. Introverted intuition to an INTJ is fed through their extroverted intuition. So it's a means by which they can be both deep and broad at the same time. It allows them to not only consider ideas in their fullest complexity and finding the most profound, far-reaching insights into these ideas, but they like to then turn it over and consider it from different perspectives. And also, when you have both kinds of intuition working together and no extroverted sensation, this is why INTJs are not good at making decisions. They're the most judicious types, the least decisive types because of that. But yeah, you'll find that when an INTJ is not confident in their physical space, when they aren't in a harmonious environment, they'll fall back on their introverted intuition. They'll go back into their heads. They'll detach from the present situation. They don't want to be detached from the present situation. They want to feel one in their experience. But if they don't have that harmony and that safety, then their mental palace, as opposed to a heaven on earth, the mental palace is where they'll retreat to. Again, not ideal for them, but that's where they can fall back if they need to. Anyway, that's what I had to say about the INTJ.
If you feel much more knowledgeable from watching this video, just think about what you could do if you knew how to apply what you had learned. In the Type Mastery pathway, you'll learn how to accurately type other people, and if you're ready to take the final exam, you can earn a certificate accrediting you as a WSS Socionist. Again, for more information, click the link in the description below.